Hi, and welcome to today's edition of In Brandon. Today, again, we're with some members from the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba, and we're with the curator, Natalia Lebedinskaya, and a local archaeologist, Suyoko Tsukamoto.
That's correct.
And Suyoko has a display on at the Art Gallery, and we're going to let you guys know all about it. So there's two shows actually going on. You've got Suyoko's show Through the Lens, and then there's also a responding show To Bury the Sun. So with Suyoko, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your show? Like, first of all, when is it opening?
The show opens next week, Thursday evening, and it's open to the public. Anyone's invited to attend, and it's free, so there's no charge to visit. The exhibit itself is about photography during the Great War, from 1914 to 1919, we'll say, and we're focusing on local materials that were photographed and collected during Brandon's time during that period.
Right. We have an opening reception going on for the show?
So our opening receptions are a way to celebrate the opening of the shows and the artists and the curators who are and everyone who's involved in making it all come together. So it's free and open to the public. Starts at 7:30 p.m. and goes until about 9:30. There will be refreshments, snacks, talks by hopefully the curators of the show, as well as some of the artists who are in the Bury the Sun show. And also, I think probably representatives from a lot of the museums will come.
Yes.
Work from whose collections is in Suyoko's show. So it's a really great way to connect to artists, the arts community, the historical community. I think this
museum and archives community.
And I think this will be a really interesting way of bringing the two together as well. So should definitely come out.
Yeah. So let's just we mentioned it's next week, but when is the show running from? What are the actual dates that it is?
So it opens next week, and our shows run about 8 weeks. So it closes on March 18th.
Right. Where did you get all the material from for the show?
From a number of collections throughout Brandon. So the Daly House Museum, the McKee Archives. I did some research at the 26th Field
Artillery Regiment.
Artillery Regiment, 12th Manitoba Dragoons Museum, the Canadian Legion, the RCA Museum at CFB Shiloh, and also the Royal Winnipeg Rifles Regimental Museum in Winnipeg.
Right. And how long did it take you to put this whole thing together?
I've been working on this project for years, in a way. My work as an archaeologist involved Camp Hughes, which was a World War I trench training warfare site between Carberry and Brandon. And so I had to do a lot of background research regarding that military training facility that was intensively used during 1915 and 1916 to train the Western Canadian troops before they went to the Western Front. It was also a militia training ground since, I'm going to say, 1908, 1909. So the locals would go there every 2 weeks in the summer to practice their training maneuvers with the local militia corps. So I had to do a lot of historical research in order for me to do the field excavation component out there, which I did with Brandon University for 2 years, one in 2013 and 2015. And then from that, because I'd been an archaeologist with Brandon University at the time, I was also researching Brandon College during the wartime period, and they had a platoon that went to train out at Camp Hughes. And as I was chasing down all the college students that were involved in the war efforts, I was consulting all the collections in the city. And then, of course, I was like, wow, there are all kinds of wonderful images and bits and pieces. Wouldn't it be nice to put them together in another show? So I pitched the idea to Natalia.
And I happen to be a photo historian. Like, when I studied art history in university for my master's, I focused exactly on these sorts of collections. So vernacular photography that's not considered to be art photography, but that nevertheless, when put in the context of an art gallery starts to really, like its object comes out, you start looking at very different things. So
What's there, what's not there.
like what's there, what's not there, or like how is the image worn, how was the image used, how did it circulate, how did it end up in the archive. So all these questions really come up in Sioko's show. So even though it's not like, the AGSM is a contemporary art gallery, so this is a very non-traditional show to include in a contemporary art gallery, but I jumped at the opportunity, and especially about the local connection to Brandon as well.
And the year is significant too, because of course this
Yeah.
is 2017, and it is the 100th anniversary of Vimy. Come April.
Yeah.
So there'll be a lot of attention, again, sort of refocused on the war during that, Canada's involvement in the war at that time. And of course it is our 150th, and there are
Yeah.
sort of nationalistic ties
Exactly.
tied into that anniversary as well. And of course we get to celebrate our local history.
Yeah.
So.
In a very, I think, interesting
Visual,
context.
visual
In a
way.
very visual context. So the curatorial process has been pretty interesting.
Well, and we've been drawing on a number of sources. So yes, it is about photography, but then also how that photography has been used or disseminated to the public. So is it a personal commemorative piece? So, you know, back in the day, Kodak had initially come out with a very small, called the pocket vest camera. And so those, usually officers or individuals who had means would have these cameras and take personal pictures. And things are very small. So these pictures are like, you know, maybe 2 inches by 3 inches.
Yeah, so they're like these tiny little, really intimate objects.
And then, of course, we have, you know, official war photographers whose job it was to go out and photo document, largely, we'll say, for propaganda purposes, the Canada's role at the front. Well, Britain's role at the front. Canada had 3 official photographers, and I think of the 13 that were subsumed for Britain. And of course, France had twice that number, and Germany had 3 times that number in terms of photo documenting the war. And then how the locals saw those images, of course, was disseminated through magazines and newspapers that they could buy at their local newsstand. There was a lot of commemorative work going on, so these images were often published in books that they would use to raise funds, or postcards they would use to raise funds for, you know, wounded soldiers or families left behind. So we have a lot of imagery pertaining to that, as well as the person.
And it's nice to get that local touch to such a global event.
I mean, Brandon, it was quite interesting. We had quite a prominent militia force here out of our local armory that's still here, and within that armory is the 26th Field Regiment RCA 12th Manitoba Dragoons Museum, and there were a number of militia forces operating out of that establishment, as well as next door at the Wheat City Arena. So I mean, we had our local militia before they became subsumed into the official Canadian Expeditionary Force battalions were the 99th Manitoba Rangers, the 12th Manitoba Dragoons, which were mounted infantry, and we had the 1st Canadian Mounted Rifles, which were who borrowed heavily from the 12th Manitoba Dragoons, so that was an official CF battalion. We had the 21st Cavalry Field Ambulance, which was a local first aid field first aid group attached to the 99th and the 12th Manitoba Dragoons. And then, of course, Brandon, for such a small town, had a number of battalions that they were drawing for. So the 1st Canadian Mounted Rifles, 45th Battalion, the 79th Battalion, the 181st Battalion, you know, the 196th borrowed from Brandon College, and of course Winnipeg had all the battalions that anyone who wanted to rush and quickly join the effort could hop on the train and go into the big city and attach themselves to a unit there. So there was lots of activity.
Yeah, and it's actually really, really well documented at the museum in the armories too.
Oh, it is a gem. There is if anyone has a chance on a Tuesday in the morning or the afternoon, I highly recommend they go and visit that space.
Yeah, such a small space.
But
they've utilized it.
Yeah, top to bottom, great use of vertical space. They have some like. Well, they're sort of the custodians and guardians of the 12th Manitoba Dragoons and the 26th Field.
It's a nice little gem.
Yeah, and they have wonderful cap badges and visual special displays in their cabinets, and you know, it's a great space. And I've been haunting. I volunteer there. And I've been haunting that haunting that museum for a number of years, and they have a really great staff there.
So for those who don't know, where is it located?
It's in the Armory, which is beside the police station on Victoria Avenue.
Corner of 11th and Victoria.
Yeah, and it's only open on Tuesdays.
Only Tuesdays.
Only Tuesdays.
Yeah.
But they're all there.
Yeah, I feel like this show will also have this really interesting effect of like spreading the word about these other collections in the city.
Well, and the Daly house is interesting too, because
Yeah.
everyone thinks of, it's Thomas Maine Daly's house. But the second owner of that home was an MLA called Caldwell. And so they moved into the home after Daly vacated, and he was a partner with Daly. And his son went to serve overseas and became a prisoner of war right out of the gate, really, in 2015. And Mrs. Caldwell was heavily involved with a lot of the women's auxiliary groups, Queen's Mary's Needlework Guild, and sending provisions overseas, so knitted socks and hats and blankets and materials for the Red Cross. So that family in that house was very active during that time, and the museum has photographs of the Caldwell family and George's time during his internment in the POW camp. The S.J. McKee Archives, of course, their mandate is to collect materials from the Southwest Manitoba region, and so people have been kind enough to donate letters and family papers and photographs. So they have, scattered throughout their collection, interesting little vignettes about individuals' experiences during the war. Most of them sad.
Well, it is war.
It is. We know what the Great War. I mean, we talk about the casualties pertaining to that. The wartime experience, and I think they're still tallying up the number of casualties from World War II on to be equivalent to how many people were lost during World War I. Yeah. So, so when you find someone, you're like, they died. Trying to find their story and, who they were here before they went overseas.
Yeah.
So, along with your show, we have a companion show, kind of a response to the show. Let us know a little bit about how you came up with that idea.
So a lot of that came out of thinking what it means to do photographic archive show within the context of a public art gallery that's focused on contemporary art. And there have been a few series of works that I've been thinking about in my interest in photography and archives in other ways. And the three artists who are in the show are Diane Boss, Sarah Crawley, and Steve Guthrow. Diane Boss's work most directly relates to the history of World War I, because what she does is she's been traveling to World War I sites in France and Belgium with something called a pinhole camera, which is like the simplest camera technology possible. It's really a box with a tiny hole in it, and then a negative that then is developed. And she thinks of it as a way to take slower photographs. So there are these really haunting images of what remains right now at those sites. So some of them look like idyllic landscapes with sheep grazing on fields and beautiful lakes, but the lakes are actually bomb craters. But the way that the landscape is portrayed is this very kind of romantic memory space. And then she uses a lot of materials in the darkroom to add to the photographs as well. So sometimes there would be leaves from the place or a little bit of dirt from the place that also start to echo kind of ideas about what that space would have been like or what that space remembers. So it's like a question of what a site remembers of the war. And also how it has withstood the test of time from when it was trenches to where now it is a commemorative site, and what that distance really means for it. And the other artists also deal with that. I've realized that little bit of space that happens and that opening that happens between when a photograph is taken or when an event occurs, and then how it then is shown to the public. So that's something that with archives, of course, is a very poignant thing, is when we look at those worn photographs, we realize that they have traveled from someone's pocket to then the archive, and that implies a certain loss and also a certain movement of something from personal history into collective history. Yeah, so Sarah Crawley, a Winnipeg-based photographer, she has been working in Hudson Bay archives. So her work isn't directly related to the war, but the piece is so exactly about what I feel is that movement from personal to the archival. So she found these things called the dead albums. And what they are is they're albums, photo albums that have been donated to the archive. And of course, photo albums aren't always acid free and necessarily stable papers. So what archives often do is they take an X-Acto knife and they cut out all the photographs and then lift them off and put them in their own storage boxes, and then the album remains with these gaps. So she has been photographing these albums as opposed to the photographs that used to be in it. Yeah. And then combining it with her own silk screens of journal writing as well. So those are also very evocative images, and I'm very interested in how they will read across from your shows, Yoko.
Because I do have sort of one album page that had been salvaged and sold as a artifact in a hobby show, if you will, and about the first CMR. But you can see it's an album page that had been taken out.
Yeah, albums are really interesting things because, of course, they're narrative devices, so they're meant to be looked at in a certain order, and the photographs are structured in them in a certain order. But that order is usually lost when it enters the archive because the order had been decided by the person who made the album. So the significance of that order is lost when it becomes a document, right? Yeah. So it's that shift from memory to document and back to memory, and and then Steve Guthrow's piece is an enormous painting, like a historic painting-sized image that I think, Sayoko, you gave me the idea to include in the show.
I love this piece. I don't know.
And it's of a soldier, a modern-day soldier, biking down a Winnipeg street. So it's this very mundane.
It's not Shiloh?
No, it's Winnipeg.
Oh, okay.
It looks like a Winnipeg street. It's like a very typical Winnipeg alley with little homes. And
that painting was part of a series that Steve had done when the Art Gallery did a special exhibition between the gallery, the Commonwealth War Training Museum, and CFB Shiloh, the RCA Museum. And the CFB Shiloh allowed Steve to go out and see the soldiers do their exercises, and then he did paintings of them, sort of like what a war artist would have done. And all these pieces are sort of a nice tie-in too, because with the RCA Museum, that's out at CFB Shiloh, they were my partner when I did the archaeological field schools. And they sort of have a tie-in to Camp Hughes as well, because a lot of visitors will go there to that museum and then visit the trench training system. And of course, we have this real World War I site in our own backyard, which sort of ties into Diane's boss's work. So for those who can't go overseas, there's still an actual landscape that they can visit here that's 30 kilometers away. And yet then the museum also has been collecting artifacts and photographs of that time that they've been kindly lent that we can send back to Brandon and put on display in this exhibit. So there are all these,
so that flow,
interrelated mesh or web of relationships with all these pieces and institutions.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of stuff there, so you can learn a lot of stuff, but going into that, you actually have an education program set up for schools and other groups to be able to come in and take advantage of seeing these two displays.
Yeah. So of course people are welcome to come to the gallery at any point in our opening hours from about 10 a.m. So it's from 10 to 5 on weekdays, 10 to 9 p.m. on Thursdays, and noon till 5 on Saturdays. But if groups are interested in coming for a more focused tour of the two shows and then some kind of an activity that they do in response to them, we have a program called Art Connects. It's ran by our fabulous art educator, Chris Cooper. And that's basically what happens is she takes them on a tour. It's for all ages. So we've had kids from primary school to high schoolers to groups from Westman Immigrant Services or
The
university classes or other community groups that can come and take advantage of this program. So it's called Art Connects. There's more detail on our website, or they can just call the gallery and find out more about it.
And is there a cost for these two displays, or is there just a entry?
Regular admission is free. For the tours and workshops, there is a small fee per participant just to offset the cost of materials. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this sounds very interesting, and I hope a lot of people come out and check this out, because, like I said, like the connection between the local and the worldwide events is something you don't get to see very often on display like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and our local institutions have been very generous about loaning original pieces, as well as allowing me to take copies of these delicate originals. The Legion was fantastic, because we talk about how things sort of get lost, if you will, but they have been a linear sort of record keeper since the soldiers returned to Brandon up to present day. And normally people are members of the Legion, and they were kind enough to loan pieces so that the general public can see what they've had in their collections.
Yeah, there's some amazing panoramas.
Yeah, and lovely artifacts from the war that they've generously shared, and then of course all, like I said, the S.J. McKee archives and the RCA Museum and the 26th Field and the Daly House and the Royal Winnipeg Rifles. I mean, they were very, very generous and kind. So.
Well, Natalia, Sioka, thank you very much for coming in today and sharing this with us.
Thank you so much for having us.